Yeah, so I told those guys they should write down the 10 things.
Okay. Is my mic on? Okay, great. I'm going to call to order this regular meeting of the Public Safety, Civil Rights, and Emergency Management Committee meeting today, which is April 30th, 2014. I am Councilmember Blong Yang, Chair of the committee. With me today are Council President Johnson, Councilmember Warsame, Councilmember Gordon, Councilmember Palmisano, and Councilmember Reich. And also joining us today is Vice President Glidden. So we have a quorum, and so we should be conducting our business. We have 3 items today. One of the items is a consent item, and the other 2 are discussion items. The first item is the Byrne Criminal Justice Innovation Program grant, and it's to authorize the application to the U.S. Department of Justice Byrne Criminal Justice Innovation Program for up to $1 million in grant funds over a 3-year period for a community strategies approach to concentrated areas of crime in North Minneapolis. And since that's a consent item, any members having any questions on that? Hearing no questions, I will move for approval of that item. All in approval, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, the motion carries. The second item today is Major League Baseball All-Star Game. As many of you know, we are going to have the All-Star game in Minneapolis this year. And this is to approve the joint powers agreement to be signed by participating city, county, and state agencies that are willing to provide public safety and security services to the city of Minneapolis related to the 2014 Major League Baseball All-Star Game from Friday, July 11th through Wednesday, July the 16th, 2014. And I believe, Mr. Osborne, you're going to speak a little bit first, and then somebody else is going to come up and speak, right?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, you had asked me at agenda setting just to briefly go over what a joint powers agreement is, and then the police department can talk about operations. But pursuant to state statute, it's very common for 2 or more units of local government in the state to kind of combine resources, if you will, and throw in together to exercise any power that they have in common. In this case, I think it's about 30 different local law enforcement agencies around the area have agreed to provide resources for event security for the All-Star Game this summer. The Joint Powers Agreement is going to include a training component, and then the operational terms, and our requirements will be that everybody agrees to defend and indemnify their own employees for anything that might happen during the event itself, and no money will change hands, so it's got no financial impact for the city. But this is fairly typical of all governmental units in the state to exercise joint powers like this under certain circumstances.
Council members, anyone have any questions with regards to the joint powers agreement? President Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I think for those people who are new, we did the same sort of a thing for the Republican convention and some of these major events that affect our communities. And, we provide services that our police department does throughout the community in a lot of different ways. And so it's always, when we have a need like this, good to see the folks that we work with, respond in kind and help us because there's just no way that we could have those kind of numbers that we need for one of these major events. And I just wanted to mention the other day, Friday, I think it was, the Major League Baseball and the All-Star Game had a press conference to talk about the charitable donations that are going to be involved in this event here. And there are a number of youth sports activities that are going to be supported in Minneapolis through investments in fields and that sort of thing. And then on the north side, we have about $1 million that is coming to the Jerry Gamble's Boys and Girls Club from Major League Baseball. Now let me think of the three groups: Major League Baseball, Twins Community Fund, and the Polad Family Foundation. So we're going to have some investments that'll last after having this game here, which we're very, very happy about.
Anyone else? All right, I see no questions. I believe it's going to be you, right, AC Clark? You're going to give a little bit of a presentation about the All-Star Game for us? I was just guessing. If it's not you, I mean, you can point out somebody else.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair, it is.
Okay.
We were just, had a lot of meetings recently on the All-Star Game, a number of command meetings. We've had briefings since November of last year. And as we discussed, I met with each one of the council members and the mayor's chief of staff on this recently. We're kind of, again, going along with the planning for the All-Star Game. We've worked closely with the Twins and Major League Baseball and continue to have meetings with them as well on the operations and the security end of setting up a number of beats downtown. We're using bikes as well, and then setting up some of the specialty units that we'll have out there, including horses and some of our tactical response folks. So we're really pleased about the progress that we're making, and we're very hopeful that some of our law enforcement partners in the metro area will help us as well. So far, we have about 135 non-Minneapolis law enforcement folks, and we expect anywhere from 30 to 50 more that will sign up to join us. Most of those individuals will be walking a beat downtown around the Target Field, or they'll be walking anywhere from Nicollet Mall to First and Hennepin. And for the most part, we're figuring that area will also include all the way up from 12th all the way to Washington. So we want to make sure that with all of the events related to the All-Star Game itself and the Home Run Derby, they're also paying attention to the hotels and some of the entertainment venues downtown. As we've discussed as well, the Twins and the police department are calling it the Green Games, so the majority of our officers will either be on foot or they'll be on a bike when they're doing their patrols. And again, we'll have the mounted patrol out as well. We have 3 various shifts that will be going on during the 3 days. That's July 13th, 14th, and 15th. The first shift is a morning shift where we have about 40 of our investigative beat officers working anywhere from around the convention center, where we know we have what's called the Fan Fest program going on, to just being out and about, so they're highly visible. And then as the games kick off, whether it's a home run derby, the futures game, and the celebrity softball game, and then actually the all-star game, we'll have a number of officers available, again, around downtown and at the venue. And the venue itself, we've worked with the Twins, have been great partners on setting up what they want for security. It matches very closely with what Major League Baseball has set up for national standards for an event like this. And so we're right in line with what they're looking for.
And AC Clark, this isn't the last step that we're going to take with regards to the All-Star Game, right?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
The joint powers agreements. I mean, is that the last step that we need to take, or are there more things that are going to come our way?
That's correct. There'll be some more items out of that, but the joint powers agreement just ensures that it's a clear understanding of authorization on what is the actual agency that's hosting this event and what the officers are doing for us while they're participating.
Okay. Councilmember Gordon?
So I'm a little bit curious about who's paying for all of this and whose responsibility it is. And I understand the deal we're getting with the All-Star Game and Major League Baseball is a little different than we might have seen in the past when we did extra work for the RNC convention, for example. We were reimbursed quite a bit for that. So I'm wondering about what kind of reimbursement, if any, we're getting for our own officers. And then I'm also wondering who the officers from other agencies, who they're working for and who's paying for them. And then my third piece is, do we have some liability, and will we be taking on liability, especially for the officers from outside jurisdictions while they're in here working in Minneapolis related to the All-Star Game, where I understand we will be their supervisors?
Yeah, Councilmember Gordon and Mr. Chair. The first part of that question related to how we're paying for this. Unfortunately, we didn't have a local fundraising body that provided any money, or as well, Major League Baseball isn't providing any money for security for this. So I wasn't part of the agreement initially with how we had signed up to participate in the All-Star Game, but we don't have a funding source for security. What we're using within the police department is that we're asking for volunteers, and because of that, we're really shifting our resources to make sure those volunteers are able to work while we still sustain our safety and security for the rest of the city. At the same time, that is the reason we went to our law enforcement partners in the metro area. We have great relationships with them. They know if they call us, we're going to help them out, and vice versa. And that's what we pretty much did, is put out a call for assistance. They know they are not being reimbursed for these hours. These are volunteer hours, and the way we placed this to the chiefs of police and the sheriffs in the metro area was, this is one way to highlight your agency as a part of a local law enforcement team, and it gives them some exposure, but also for the officer, it gives them some time away from a regular duty job to an event that's a national event, and it's something fun for them. And again, we discussed, this is the Green Games, this is a family fun event. We really expect that mostly families, grandparents, children are going to be participating in this. We don't see a lot of issues with the bars and other events that you might have for other national events that we've had before, like RNC. With the Joint Powers Agreement, it's very similar to agreements we've had in the past. Officers that assist us, they are still liable for their policies and procedures within their police department. They're acting within those policies and procedures as well as state statute. And if they act outside of that authority, the department themselves, they're liable for that. And those mutual aid agreements that we have, that's a clear understanding of how we work together. As a police department, what we'd be liable for is the supervision we give them. If we give them a direction or a command that's incorrect, and that results in an issue, then we would be liable for that. But that would be at our discretion.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any other person with a question? All right, seeing none, I will move for approval of that item. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Oppose? Motion carries. All right, the third item is a discussion item on the Equitable Solutions for One Minneapolis, a racial equity framework, or what's been known as the Racial Equity Toolkit. And with that, Director Corbell would be presenting, and it's understood. We're going to give you 40 minutes to do the presentation. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam President, Madam Vice President, Council and Committee members. My name is Velma Corbell. I'm the Civil Rights Director here in the city of Minneapolis. And before I get into the bulk of the presentation, I would like to introduce, or at least have you acknowledge, members of the staff's, the city's racial equity staff team. Some of them are in the room, most of them are. Paul Austin, Mark Brenda, Karen Francois, Lance Knuckles, Patience Ferguson, Kelly Jones, Kim Keller, David Rubador, Noria Rivera Vandermeide, and Destiny Shong. I think I got everybody. Did I get everybody? Okay. And then I'd also like to say thank you and welcome to several members from the community. On April 15th, I had hosted a meeting in the Civil Rights Department for our Minneapolis, the group organized under the Organizing Apprenticeship Project, and had a really good discussion with that group. And this is an indication of the interest that the OAP has in this work. So a lot of those members are here. Also indicative of the interest of the racial equity work that the city is undertaking, we have some colleagues from Meet Minneapolis in the room today as well, who are just getting to know what we're doing. I have In your packet, you have the request for council action, the PowerPoint presentation, a report, and some of the racial equity toolkit tools. They're not all of the tools, but you have some of them, and we'll talk a little bit about those here as we go forward. We are here today requesting the council approve the work that has been ongoing by the racial equity staff team, the Equitable Solutions staff team. But we're mostly here to get your endorsement of what we've been doing. I understand I've got some actions there requested in the RCA, but I understand there's probably going to be some additional direction given by the committee today. And so as we get to the end of the presentation, we'll talk about those more, I'm sure. So let's talk about the framework, the racial equity framework, or the Equitable Solutions framework. The way the staff has been viewing this work and talking about this framework, we've been looking at it as principles and strategies. And those principles and strategies are undergirded by the council's adopted strategic directions that you adopted earlier this month. And we'll also, I've mined sort of the strategic directions, and we'll talk specifically about the strategic directions that are directly related to this work as we go a little deeper into the presentation. But we're also going to talk about a set of tools today that have been under development in the city that include the racial equity assessment, the guide, specifically the guide to equitable procurement, the guide to engaging boards and commissions, the guide to recruitment and selection, and then we're also going to talk a little bit about training, because we can't really embark on this work in the city unless we have the individuals who are going to be the champions of this work, at least on a level playing field. So I'm going to go very quickly through the first few slides. This is primarily background. I'm assuming that most of us have probably heard enough presentations about the inequities and disparities in the city to know about this. But the city of Minneapolis has been engaging in work that has had improvements for underserved, underrepresented communities at the forefront for generations, as long as it's been a city. But it focused its racial equity efforts specifically in 2008 with the creation and adoption of a resolution, 2008 R184. I won't read all of the bullets on the slide in front of you. You have that. But what I would focus on is that this resolution created a racial disparities task force that went to work in about 2008, concluded its work in approximately 2010. And what that Employment Equity Task Force did was produced a set of recommendations specifically related to addressing racial disparities in employment in the city of Minneapolis. Right at the tail end of the work by that Employment Equity Task Force, you may be familiar with a report that came out from the Economic Policy Institute that really rocked the region because it talked about unemployment in the top 10 metropolitan regions in the country. And what it showed us in this region was that Minneapolis, St. Paul, Bloomington region had the worst unemployment disparity between whites and African Americans of any region surveyed out of those top 10. So the city then took a more concerted focus on its racial equity work. And with the assistance of a report that was done by the Minneapolis and Wilder Foundations, also about that same time, understood that the racial disparities that existed in the region were not just racial disparities in employment, but across every socioeconomic indicator that was surveyed by the Minneapolis Foundation, those disparities were identified. So that 2012 resolution that refocused the city's efforts, and again, I won't read all of the bullets, but I will read bullet number 4. Because in addition to instructing the city to lead by example, the resolution also directed that the city coordinator, the CPED director, and the civil rights director with other department heads, staff, and key stakeholders would develop a racial equity assessment and toolkit. And that work focused us really looking internally at 3 key areas. We were focusing on, and have been focusing for the last many months, on employment, which we're looking at recruitment and selection. At engagement, we're focusing on engaging board and commission memberships and procurement. So in leading by example and looking at those 3 areas, the next few slides are going to be data specifically related to employment engaging boards and commissions, and procurement. So we'll go to the first view, and we can't start a discussion about employment disparities without showing you a breakdown of the demographics in the population of Minneapolis, which is about 382,000 people, and about 40% non-white, 60% white. And if you'll look at the slide, you will see how that non-white or the people of color are broken down as well. So 40% non-white, 60% white. The next slide will show you the 2012-2013 enrollment in the Minneapolis public schools. Then flip to the next slide. I put the demographic slide in the city and the public school enrollment slide side by side because I think it's important to look at that. Our current population, 40% non-white, 60% white, and we're talking about the socioeconomic disparities that exist in the region and beginning to develop some strategies about what we can do about that. But if you look at the current Minneapolis public school enrollment, which is our future workforce, if we don't do something about these racial disparities that exist today, we can't sustain the current situation if that much of a majority of our population are people of color. We also wanted you to take a look at the demographics inside the city of Minneapolis. If you'll look across the bar chart, 23% of the current workforce, about 3,500 employees, are people of color. If you remember the slide just prior to this, 40% of the population is people of color. And if 23% of our workforce population are people of color to 40% in the demographic, there's a significant gap between our current workforce and the population in the city of Minneapolis. The next slide is the data that we are looking at when we're talking about engaging boards and commissions. And this is from a voluntary survey that was conducted in 2011. The results were tabulated in 2012. 14% of those individuals surveyed, the membership surveyed, identified themselves as people of color. Again, 14% identified themselves as people of color. The population in the city of Minneapolis is 40% people of color. So there's a little bit of a gap there between our representation of board and commission membership and what the population is in the city of Minneapolis. So we've talked about employment, we've talked about engaging boards and commissions. These next couple of slides are talking about procurement and how we can, how we've identified the data that gets us started from a baseline to improve the conditions within the city. I have two slides. The first is the small and underutilized business program statistics as of the end of 2013. You may recall that the city of Minneapolis has a 12% aspirational goal for including small minority firms in its procurement and contracting. If you'll look at the bar graph, committed minority business enterprise inclusion is only at 7.23%. The actual that's been measured to date is about 2.96. That's a far cry from the 12% aspirational. And the reason it's 12%, if you remember, we had a 25% aspirational goal that was approved by the council. 13% of that was for women business inclusion, 12 was for minorities. Since we're talking about racial disparities here today, we're focusing on that 12%. And we're a little ways away from that, just with the committed and with the verified. The next slide that I'll put up is this very popular cone slide that looks at the city's direct purchasing in 2012. And what happened in 2012 is we spent about $6,500,000 on the city's direct purchases for purchasing and contracts under $50,000 in a select number of account codes. Those account codes where the city could purchase on the open market. And even narrowing the focus of that procurement to those account codes that could be, where things could be purchased on the open market, only about $106,000 of it occurred with minority firms. So we have a little ways to go there as well. The staff team has discussed some targets that will help us close the gap between the baselines that I've just showed you and where we need to go. And we've got 4 targets here on the next slide that we have identified. That we want to create market parity in the city enterprise workforce by 2020. We want to go from the 23% that we talked about to closer to the 40% and pin that to the census, the decennial census. We want to increase the participation of minority business enterprises in city contracting and procurement to the 12% aspirational goal to get us to that full 25% when we add in the women business enterprises. And we want to improve board and commission membership so that it's also reflective of the city's demographic pinned to the census. So one of the things that we have talked about at the racial equity staff team is what should we ask the council to be thinking about when we bring the framework forward to them. And I know that we're going to have, this is only the first discussion about this work, and so there will be other questions raised as well. But I've tried to list down some of the questions that the staff team identified would be interesting to have you start thinking about, because eventually those questions will need to be answered. Should the City Council adopt a standard racial equity assessment tool to be used by all city staff? How will the executive leadership be held accountable? Should your document, the request for council action format, be changed to include a set of racial equity questions so as policies, programs are brought to you for your approval and adoption? How will you challenge department heads and staff to meeting racial equitable goals? How will the goals and targets be determined to have been met? Who will determine if the goals have been met? And what is going to be the official data that we'll use to baseline the work and also to benchmark the work as we move forward? Questions were asked about who we've been involving in this work, and so we put together not a complete catalog, not a complete list, but identifying individuals or organizations that have been working with us since we started this work in late 2007, early 2008. But I want to call out particular attention to the city department heads. And the city department heads have been involved in discussions about racial equitable work for the last year or more. One of the things that the department heads did, if you recall, back in October of last year, all the department heads went to a racial equity training that was facilitated by the Seattle Race and Social Justice Initiative. We had individuals here who did that training. In February of this year, I think I've mentioned this a couple times, the city department head actually came to consensus on a racial equity commitment statement where we all agree that as the tools are developed, as the training is developed, as ideas, information, data is identified that can move us closer to achieving racial equity outcomes, the department heads are on board to engage in that work. Currently, the department heads are also using the racial equity assessment tool that we'll talk about here in a little bit to run its business plan through a racial equity lens. So there's ongoing work using the tools as we speak. Other questions that were raised about this work is, where are we getting our ideas? Who are we looking to as experts? Where are we adopting and adapting best practices? And we will take any good information that we can and use it to move racial equity work forward. But the primary programs that we have been using are out of the Seattle, Washington Race and Social Justice Initiative and the City of Portland's program and their Office of Equity and Human Rights. The reason I bring up these two in particular is because the City of Seattle's work, the origin was enterprise work. The City of Seattle really were doing pretty much what we're doing now, looking inwardly at how they could create racially equitable outcomes inside the City of Seattle's programs. On the other hand, the City of Portland, the origin of their work was in the community. And so they have really good models for engaging with the community, to have the community sitting at the table to create these racial equitable outcomes. So we like work from Seattle. We also like work from the City of Portland. And we have been using those to create the City of Minneapolis's racial equity tools. The next two slides are about strategies that the the racial equity staff team, the equitable solutions staff team, identified as really the three primary drivers to doing this work. We want to apply a racial equity lens to all programs and projects, policies within the city. We want to build racial equity into the policies and citywide initiatives. And we want to partner with other institutions and communities. So I'm going to focus on the last bullet there for just a minute. So the work we are doing from the 2012 resolution has really been mostly internal facing work. When we're looking at our procurement, when we're looking at our human resources, our recruitment and selection, and when we're looking at our engaging boards and commissions, it really is looking inwardly at the city and positioning ourselves to lead by example, because it's very difficult to admonish others in the community for not doing good racial equity work if we don't have our own house in order. The other reason I would point out that last bullet is that there is also an opportunity here to think about the inward-facing work that we're doing and recognizing that the tools we're developing are also capable of being adapted for use with that external-facing work. And when I talk about the external-facing racial equity work, I'm talking about the work that needs to happen in the city as a whole to create racial equitable outcomes, work that we don't do necessarily in the city, but work where we have significant influence, although we might not have control. The next slide, again, these are your strategic directions. These are the strategic goals that were adopted earlier this month. And as I said, I went through a list of, I suppose, 30 or 40 of the strategic directions and pulled these out because these strategic directions, racial inequities, are addressed and eliminated. Equitable solutions and policies lead to a high quality of life for all, focus on areas of greatest need. The workforce is diverse, well-educated, engaged in talented employees, residents are informed and engaged in city government. These, to me, are really a reaffirmation and a reconfirmation by you that staff needs to continue doing this work that you directed us to do in 2012. The next few slides are slides, I don't want to call them dreamer slides because these are actually questions raised about potential initiatives or programs, improvements that could be made in the city to address the racial inequities, to create racially equitable outcomes. And they're divided once again, looking at human resources or the recruitment and selection, looking at engaging boards and commissions, and looking at procurement. So the human resources subject matter experts on the racial equity team want to do a couple of things. They want to hire, certainly, to create diversity in the workforce that's reflective of the demographic in the city, but they also, we also want to create a city that is retaining and developing employees so that people across this region and across the state and across the country are looking at us and saying this is a top-tier employer of choice because it's living its strategic goals, as we mentioned on the previous slide. Under engaging boards and commissions, I know that there's some work ongoing with rewriting some of the principles of engagement or the community engagement work out of the Neighborhood and Community Relations Department. But the subject matter experts that are part of this team, and I mentioned their names earlier, want to think about how to adapt processes and principles from models within the city, within the state, within the region, and across the country that will allow us to engage memberships on boards and commissions that are reflective of the population in the city and create the racial diversity that we want to see. The last slide, talking about procurement, you probably noticed in your packet that the procurement guide or the guide to equitable purchasing is not complete because there's currently ongoing work in the city where there's an actual procurement advisory group that is looking at a range of issues around the city that is perhaps impeding our ability to contract and procure things from women and minority firms. since we're talking about minority businesses here as the subject of this work, that group is looking at what we would call the low-hanging fruit, or the easy things that the city could be doing that doesn't take a lot. But they're also looking at more strategic things that could be that could impact racial equitable outcomes, including the acquisition of new technology that will give us the ability to be able to track how well we're doing in some of these areas, because frankly, we don't have that right now. So let's talk about the tools for a little bit. So, no, let's wait. Let me just get through the presentation. We'll go through the tools. We're going to talk about the racial equity assessment, and the racial equity assessment is a document that you've seen in your packet, and it is an opportunity for decision makers to take a pause and address the 3 bullet points that you see on the slide. The decision maker is thinking about the racial equity impacts of the decision that they're about to make. This is also an opportunity during that pause for the decision maker to consider existing or other data and information to baseline and gauge the elimination of disparities. But it's also an opportunity for that decision maker to consider and engage the stakeholders in that decision. So I want to talk a little bit here about the teams, the department racial equity teams. We'll go into a little bit more detail here in a second. But this thoughtful pausing that needs to happen at the department level is not just the department head by him or herself stopping and pausing and thinking. This is an opportunity for department heads and senior staff to engage with employees in their departments wherever they may reside along the hierarchy inside of the department, as long as they know about the work to be able to do the three things that we just talked about. The racial equity guides, the guide to equitable procurement, the guide to engaging boards and commissions, the guide to recruitment and selection are really a focus on a specific area of work and a procedure so that departments that are engaging in work in those 3 areas can go through a step-by-step set of questions that are, again, intended to evaluate the racial equity impact of that decision, consider the information, and engage the stakeholders in the city and outside the city. The racial equity team structure, we'll show you a diagram of that in a minute. And you have it in your packet. It probably looks really bureaucratic, but it's not intended to be, because if we've been talking to department heads about the team structure diagram, what we've been saying to people is, depending on the size and complexity of your department, you could have multiple teams or a single team. The only thing that we have said to departments as they're considering who should be in their department racial equity teams is that the individuals that are seating these teams need to be passionate about racial equity work. They need to be engaged. They need to be thoughtful. They need to be open-minded. They need to be diverse. They need to know the work of the department. And they need to have some knowledge about the data, the root causes of disparities, et cetera. And the only way you get that in a racial equity team member is they have to be trained. Again, it's not our expectation that we could say, okay, we knight you a racial equity team member within your department, go forth and now do your thing. It takes some thought, it takes some intentionality, and so it takes some training and some knowledge and some awareness, because it's the racial equity team, that first level of individuals, who will help identify opportunities that could go through that racial equity assessment or any of those guides. They're also going to be helpful and knowledgeable and smart about identifying who the stakeholders might be that need to be engaged in the process. And they're also going to be helpful because they'll know the work and identifying the initial or existing data that need to be in the conversation. The racial equity assessment and the guides and the team structure are only some of the tools that are part of the racial equity toolkit. as you know, a toolbox, a toolkit is going to have more than just a minimal number of things in it. So our toolkit also includes training. It's our hope that at some point in the next several years, every employee in the city of Minneapolis will have had some sort of racial equity training. But at a minimum, we need to start with training the department heads and those individuals who are going to be in the departments doing the racial equity work initially. So there are other things here that we want to do. We want to create a website, because these forms that you see, we want them to be fillable online. We want to have examples of how to fill out, how to complete some of these guides. We want to have data available to individuals for their use. Very quickly, key partners and stakeholders going forward. I've listed some here on the slide. It's certainly not all of them. I'd also, again, like to acknowledge our partners from OAP and from our Minneapolis, who've been consulting with us on this work for the last several weeks and months, very early, engaging with the staff team. Question was asked, what other things might this impact? Some of the related policies and programs. I've tried to give you a list of those as well. Just early brainstorming with the staff team. There certainly are probably going to be many other things that departments will identify that will need to be looked at through that racial equity lens. And the last slide is sort of a best case implementation timeline. The things, again, in progress where we're actually using some of the racial equity tools to do our work, the budget, the business plan. We are engaged with additional staff at this time working on the racial equity action plan. That was a subject of staff direction in March 2000, or in just this past March. And I understand that there are meetings tomorrow and on the 6th to talk about the definitions of equity and racial equity. These next few slides are about the actions requested from you today. And I know that these are probably not going to be adopted based on conversations that I've had offline with a couple of the council members, but I'll just read them, because at some point when we are moving forward in a holistic way with this work, I think the actions will need to be approved by the council. So the actions would be to adopt the proposed racial equity framework, equitable solutions for One Minneapolis, by approving the following: that the racial equity assessment that we've just discussed be mandatory use by department leadership, that the council authorize the staff team to start working on accountability standards for how we will hold ourselves accountable to this work, that the racial equity team and other staff engage with community organizations and other stakeholders, that the city council authorize the city clerk and appropriate staff to amend the RCA, the request for council action, include those racial equity policy questions, and that the city council identify or authorize the racial equity team and other department heads to identify the data that needs to be used in order to do this work, and that you also authorize the racial equity team to come back as appropriate to make periodic reports to the council on the progress of our work. And that's the end of the PowerPoint, and so if I'd be ready to take any questions.
Thank you. I appreciate that you stayed even within 30 minutes, so that's great. I just wanted to give the committee members just a brief little bit of history from my perspective. As a new council member who was given the chair of this committee, one of the things that happened when I started on January 6th was that I don't know if it was right before that or right after that, I was given the resolution from 2012 from council member Gordon and the former council member Don Samuels with regards to, what started this process. And I figured, okay, well, I guess it's in the committee, so we'll take a look at it and we'll just see where it goes. And, not too long afterwards, one of the council members actually asked about the status of this, and I frankly didn't know. So our office went searching for the answers for this. And, so we basically convened some meetings with the Director of Civil Rights, but other folks as well, just to figure out where we are in this process. And, I guess the first thing that just popped in my mind was, I don't know why, but it's taken quite a long time to get to this point. And, where we're at right now, I mean, I just don't know if we're done yet or we have a finished product yet. And so I was concerned with giving this to my colleagues, as an unfinished product, because in essence, I mean, whatever product we give to my colleagues, it would be important to have something of a finished product so that they would, have a chance to weigh in on this whole thing. And so that's kind of where I'm at. But I'm going to recognize Councilmember Gordon first. And, if Councilmember Gordon, if you can also give a little bit of background on the resolution of, I think it was 2012, or maybe it was even earlier, that started this whole process, and then go to your question, that would be wonderful.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and appreciate the presentation. And a lot of the background was covered at the beginning of the presentation, because I think this is work that started back in 2007 or 2006 when we started hearing about the economic income and wealth and employment disparities in the city. And so we did start that original task force in 2008 with the purpose of really looking at employment disparities. And there was a long time that work group, as often work groups do, met and talked, and we had a lot of the various stakeholders on that, including the county and social services and providers, nonprofit, as well as city staff. And we made a lot of progress, and then that grew into, ultimately, after some stakeholder meetings and focus groups, into a report that came forward, and that report came forward, and with it was the resolution that we're kind of teed up the racial equity toolkit. So a lot of work went into this, and I was glad to see that it's coming back today and that we're getting to look at it. I did have one specific question that I wanted to ask about, which is one of the slides. I think it's on maybe page 14. So it's about the solutions targets. One of the things that we looked at when we were doing our early work, also that I looked at anyway and was trying to follow, was our affirmative action plan, which got passed in 2009 and was to be covered from January 1, 2009 to December 31st, 2013. And so that's where I first learned about this idea of market parity when you're talking about affirmative action plans. So maybe you could just tell us what market parity means in terms of this goal. And I'm also curious about where we are with our affirmative action plan and if we've updated it since 2009.
I will, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Gordon, I will take a stab at the market parity question. And then Destiny Xiong is here from Human Resources. I don't know if Patience is in the room or not, but they may be able to talk specifically about the development of the affirmative action plan.
Oh, that'd be great.
But relative to the market parity, without going into a whole lot of detail about availability and availability computations when you're identifying goals and timetables for a particular job group in an affirmative action plan, the market parity discussion is about moving the city's workforce demographic from 23% representation of people of color to the 40% or pinned to the census. But if you know about availabilities in an affirmative action plan, there are some job groups, officials and administrators being one, that already show that the availability and the representation of people in the workforce is already at a parity. So what that tells us, if we look at that particular job group, is that if you look at the availability of officials and administrators in the labor market to the population of officials and administrators in the city workforce, that there's a parity there, that the availability is less than the representation of those people in the workforce. But our purpose here is in looking at the workforce in its entirety to the city population, because I think that's what the council has indicated that they're interested in doing, and also what the community is interested in seeing.
Well, and I appreciate seeing both of those goals here. I think I appreciate the long-term perspective in terms of looking at the demographics of the city. But I also remember that affirmative action report, and one of the things that we did find there when we looked at it in terms of what the available potential employees who are qualified for the job, and that's kind of that market issue, we were especially falling short in gender. We had a lot of departments and a lot of work that we looked at. There was actually enough people qualified to do that work that were of both genders, and yet we didn't have that kind of diversity represented. But what's really going to be important then, if we're going to measure that, is if we make sure we have updated numbers and if we have our new plan. And so I would like to hear a little bit about where we are with that.
So I'll ask Destiny Shung from the HR department to come up and talk about the affirmative action plan. But the beauty of the recruitment and selection guide is that it gives us the opportunity to take that pause and look at all the data and information that's necessary to achieve the goals that you just spoke about.
Good afternoon. The affirmative action plan is currently being worked on with the Director Ferguson in collaboration with the Civil Rights Contract Compliance, and reviewing all of the utilization and underutilization numbers to produce a final report of the affirmative action plan.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Maybe I could ask, do you know when the report might be ready, a final report?
I do not have a definite date of when that will be ready, but I can definitely find out and get back to you.
Okay, thank you. I do have some motions that I want to make, but I think I'll wait and see if there's more questions right now.
President Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I need to go back to what Councilmember Gordon was asking about this. I think that we set ourselves up for unnecessary pressure when we don't look at people that are qualified, in the comparison of people that are qualified in the workplace and the positions we are trying to fill. I mean, that's part of the disparities. I mean, if we're ignoring that, we're ignoring the fact that, X percentage of white kids graduate from high school, and a much smaller percentage of African American kids graduate from high school. So why would we want to do that? And I don't understand that you've been given that direction. I don't remember that at all.
Mr. Chair, Council President Johnson, I think that the issue here is not trying to set ourselves up for failure. I think it's having the conversation with staff in the community so that everybody is understanding the limitations that we're operating under, so that when we go back and look at an affirmative action plan and we see a job group that looks to be underutilized, we understand why that's happening. And there is a dearth of people who can do the exact work in the city labor market as the people that we need to hire here. I think that's part of the conversation. But the other part of this conversation is that the affirmative action plan can also help inform our work as we engage with partners in education outside of the city. Because if you remember the slide that I talked about, that where this work is inwardly facing, we're going to have conversations, and I know some of them have already started, that if there is a lack of people in the labor market to do the work that we need them to do here in the city, there are additional conversations that need to happen. And so it's an opportunity to engage with schools and VOTECs and community colleges and individuals who can help us bring the people to the city that need to do the jobs. Then there's a next layer of that's the VOTECs, the community colleges and the universities and the high schools then are working on an achievement gap. And then the next layer is that the people who are working on a high school achievement gap are also working on third grade reading level. So it really is a continuum. And this conversation that we're having in the city is not meant to set the city up for failure, but used as a conversation starter about all the other places where the city has direct control to make changes, but also the places that the city can influence changes to help us meet our goals internally.
Well, again, statistics are statistics, and I will tell you right now that, we're going to get stuff thrown in our face. And I think as an employer, we match up well or exceed other governmental units in this region. We always have, always will. And so I'm really reluctant to have something out there that we measure against that is an inefficient measure, in my opinion. I just was at a meeting at at UROC this week, chatting about their work in North Minneapolis, which is nothing short of fantastic. But the question was asked: how many African American men are at the University of Minnesota? Well, they don't know. They don't know. Nobody asked that question. And I said, I really want to know how many kids from North Minneapolis are enrolled in the professional schools at the University of Minnesota. And I think the number is dismal. I really do. And yet, our health department has jobs available for people with masters in public health. That's sometimes a required entry into a particular position. I'd like to know how many kids are out, how many kids, I shouldn't say that, how many people are out there qualified in this community to take that job before we get hammered because, all of our health researchers are not people of color. I just think I think it's ignoring reality. And I think we'll get tagged with it. So I'm pushing against this.
Mr. Chair, Council President Johnson, the beauty of the racial equity work that we're doing that's engaging the community is also, in addition to consulting with the community, is having the community sitting at the table. So your characterization of being tagged with something negative, I think, is possibly lessened if the community is at the table and understanding the limitations that we have when we're trying to achieve the racial equity goals. So if the folk from OAP are sitting in the room with us when we're trying to fill a job or when we are getting ready to recruit for a job and they understand the limitations, I tend to think that there's less likelihood of tagging, because this work, when you're talking about engaging community, puts the community at the table with you, and they're held accountable for the results as well. So this is not the community consulting and then being able to throw stones because we didn't achieve what we said we were going to achieve. The community is at the table and therefore held accountable to the results as well.
Council President Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've been here long enough. What the community is always a question. That's like the $64,000 question. Who is the community? And, I think, and Councilmember Yang, I'm sure remembers this when we had we won among a police officer in North Minneapolis, and we had these young kids that were actually organized by, a professional organizer, talking to us about really and truly, I'm being honest, really and truly saying, City Minneapolis, we need among police officers, which I don't disagree with in any fashion at all. But so what are the barriers? What are the barriers? And are we the bad guys because we don't have among police officer? Well, you chat with people and you find out, how do kids choose a career? If parents aren't saying this is a good field to go into, kids aren't going to go into it, and so I just think there are so many things we're setting ourselves out on the gangplank to be shot at again, and if that's what people want to do, fine, but I'm into more practical things, I guess.
So if I may interject, I was actually one of the rabble rousers that wanted that, and I'm going to say this. I mean, at that point, there were 12 Minneapolis cops who were mowing, but they were just not on the north side, and if they were on the night shift, and so there were all these barriers such as the labor contract and all these different things, and the community just wanted one person on the day shift, and it wasn't that hard, and eventually we got there. But yeah, I think, there are certain things that are good solutions that are, very immediate solutions. And I think the city council actually did a great job of finding that solution. So, I think sometimes, the answers that we get, such as, the union contracts prevent that and all that stuff, sometimes we have to look deeper to see what really are the impediments. But that situation, I think the city council did a great job in finding that person. So that's good. Councilmember,
that conversation that you two just had, that's the conversation that needs to happen at the department level. That's the kind of conversation that's rich and engaging and inviting that needs to be happening too at the department level. And that's what we're talking about when we're taking a pause to ask ourselves the questions on the racial equity impacts of the work that we're doing. It's just that same kind of conversation.
Councilmember Reich?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and certainly this underscores the complexity of the matter before us and the multi-layers and multifaceted componentry of this. It's quite complex, and I imagine that's part of the reason why we've been working on this for decades. And there's been many iterations of it, and now before us we have our most recent iterations informed by the past iterations, some that Councilmember Gordon just shared with us, but even the ones that go back before I was even born with Civil Rights Act, et cetera. And so we keep working at it because we're committed to it, and it's actually a testimony of our commitment that we do the work. It's also a testimony of how good our city is, that we put a lot of bandwidth and brain power and departmental force behind these efforts, and it does matter. That's why you have lively debate here and lively debate that I think we're going to look forward into the community. And to your point, Director, I really do look forward to those conversations, and I like President Johnson. I like to get to something. Where's my little piece of this where I can push? What side of the barn wall can I raise, sort of thing? And I'm very engaged presently, as many know, in the public school system is one of my sort of pet passions. And I know there's no formal power that we hold here, but to your point, we have a lot of informal power, and we can have a lot of conversations that can get to the people who have formal power. And I know Chief Friedel is really leading the charge. It's more than an idea with him. He's already engaging principals and administrators to actually get a pilot program going that can go citywide from one department, which we think can be replicated to several others. And that goes to the other point that Council President Johnson raised. People need to know about it, find a pathway, but before even that happens, it needs to be desired. Mm-hmm. And we need to show people that working for the city is a great place to be. It's a place of pride for yourself and your family if you so choose to go there. And that's the place that we want to be in, and I'm very committed to that. I also want to raise just one specific thing. When we look at the work shed, potential work shed, and limit it to the city, I know there was a time when we had mandated, residency requirements, and that's not a place where we're at now, and probably are precluded through some, legal. Yeah, state law. There you go. They're talking about a real impediment. But we should then therefore look at what our work shed really is, and make sure that our numbers and percentages that we're talking about reflect that, because it's not true that we can just look at the city of Minneapolis as a hiring place. Now, maybe short of the state law prohibitions, can we have a higher local component? Because it stands to reason, if we have more people of color in our geographic municipal boundary, that odds are we'll have more luck in getting the people we desire to fill our ranks. So again, the conversation keeps going on.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Wright, to both your points, one of the things that I think is most compelling about the work that we're doing in the city of Minneapolis, and I think why this racial equity staff team is so committed to it, is because it's one of the first metropolitan areas in the country that has actually passed a resolution to address racial equity. And we're one of a handful of regions in the country that actually has data to support the work that we're doing, because you can't know how to close the gap if you don't know where you're starting. So to your point on that, the city is, it is leading by example. It really is. And then to your next point on the boundaries from where we know employees come from, it's a small world. We got people who work here who live in Wisconsin and live outside the county, and not that people from Wisconsin are bad, I don't mean to imply that, but when the affirmative action plan is being developed, Destiny, when the affirmative action plan is being developed, they are looking at 11 counties worth of data. So it's not just the city of Minneapolis where we know we're drawing from the labor force, but we're looking at that wider group.
Council or Vice President Glidden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And it's sometimes hard to know exactly when's the right point to make a comment. I think it's fine to do it now, and I know Councilmember Gordon is in queue with a motion that he intends to make, and I wanted to be here to hear that motion and support him in the committee and in the work that you're doing here. But I just want to make a few comments about the presentation, and I really want to think there's a really engaged staff team that is working, and I appreciate some of the examples that you gave, Director Corbell, of some of the things that have been happening over a course of time. And I think from a policymaker perspective, and my guess is I'm not so different from many of my colleagues. My care is that we move the work forward, but we also know that what we're doing is going to be a product that we understand is the product that we want, that we understand can be institutionalized, that we understand will be a usable product, and that we're thinking about how we have an enterprise-wide approach, that we're moving beyond. I know you and I have talked about this before, just thinking it's one person's responsibility who's a leader here, to thinking about is everyone's responsibility as part of the enterprise, and that we're institutionalizing how we think about these issues and how we work on them together. And regardless, I think, of what's the specific action steps that we move forward with today, and I know there's movement forward that is happening, and again, I think there's I'm happy about some specific things in particular, and Councilmember Gordon's staff direction we're about to hear that I think show important leadership from the top of the city all the way down. But we're already kind of in the middle of this conversation. So I don't want this impression to be that there is something that is being held back by the fact that we want to make sure what keeps moving forward is a good and usable product that can be institutionalized and affect the entire enterprise. From the examples that you gave from the department heads engaging in all-day training last year, to the fact that I think maybe not every single council committee meeting, but regularly, the notion of how we examine our work through a racial equity lens, and those specific words may not be used, but that is happening in our work today, and in the fact of how we framed our goals that we have already approved, and the fact that the City Council has committed to engage with a facilitator in the sessions that you identified, where we are going to come to a common understanding around some really key important terms of equity and racial equity, so that we are not just using these terms, but having a common understanding that we took time to develop amongst ourselves. And I really want to thank Council President Johnson and Councilmember Gang for really pushing that as something that we should do together as a city council. And I think too, you're seeing a council that is concerned that we're able to kind of turn this corner to results. I mean, that's what we want. We want to set up an appropriate framework, but we want to be able to turn it into results. And I want to just use one example of something that's happening right now that I think is also a partnership opportunity that talks about what I think is an opportunity for seeing results, and is talking about city jobs. Mm-hmm. So a few weeks ago, Higher Minnesota representatives and Councilmember Reich and I had what I thought was a very interesting and productive meeting with our Public Works Department. And the meeting was initiated by Higher Minnesota to talk about something that was, I think, kind of discreet, which was what job opportunities are there around organics collection. But if we adopt organics collection, but it turned into a bigger conversation about job opportunities in general in the Public Works Department. And through the conversation, we asked the question, what's going to happen over the next 5 years with jobs in the Public Works Department? And we were told from that department of about 900 employees that they would see somewhere between 30 to 40% turnover. Mm-hmm. And so that's a lot of jobs. And in that conversation that included community members, our Public Works leadership was open about wanting to get advice and partnership on how we can do a better job on recruiting, and how we can do a better job on re-examining what are the needed qualifications to do jobs within the Public Works Department. I thought it was a productive conversation, and it showed an openness on behalf of the city to say we're not seeing the results we want to see, mm-hmm. but also opening the door to the community to say, we need your help, we would like your help, and we would like you to be in partnership with us. So that's something that is happening right now. Our HR director, Patience Ferguson, has been in conversation with myself and with Council President Johnson on how we might do a bigger session that talks about hiring within the city and what might be our projections for hiring over the next 5 years. And it's again to talk about these issues of how are we going to diversify our workplace? What are the barriers to doing that? How can we do a better job? And how can we take advantage of the expertise, the energy, and the ingenuity of our community partners and broader range of stakeholders on how we can do that job? So I just use that as an example to say what happens exactly with this larger piece of moving forward culture change in the city is one thing, but there is work that's happening that is being influenced by these conversations today. So thank you.
So I have two questions for Director Corbell. One is, why has this taken so long to get to this point?
Mr. Chair, I don't know that it's taken that long. We started the work on Resolution 2012R in October of 2012. We were starting sort of on the ground floor with learning how to develop a racial equity toolkit and doing the research and identifying models that we wanted to use from across the country. So that took time. Just about the time we were ready to actually introduce the results of that work, we were in the middle of a council election. So that happened. So we had, a majority of our city council were newly elected individuals. We had a new mayor in her role, even though she was a member of the city council. So it's just taken some time in the last 5 to 6 months to be ready to tee this up, where we felt like everyone was at a place where they would be receptive to and open-minded to get the information. So I don't think it took necessarily a long time. It's just the timing of some other major city events really impacted the schedule.
So October 12th was when you all started, right?
Yes,
Okay, so it's been, what, a little bit over 18 months?
that is correct.
Okay, and on a scale of 1 to 10, how complete are you all with regards to this project?
I don't know if complete's the right word necessarily, because we're bringing you some things that are in draft today, but this is iterative work. If you think about engaging a department to talk about a racial equity assessment of a piece of work that they're about to be engaged in, the work is never really complete. The work won't be complete until there are no longer racial inequities in the city of Minneapolis. So it is an iterative process.
Okay, well, how complete are we with the toolkit?
The toolkit is not complete as well because the documents are only a component of the toolkits. I mentioned to you that we would need to do some training. We haven't yet started that to the extent that we would like to. These tools are in draft form, as you've seen, because as we've been going out and talking to individuals in the committee and other city staff, we're tweaking them to make them more useful and usable for people who are participating in this work. The guide to equitable purchasing you saw that says it's under construction or coming soon is a factor of some ongoing work with purchasing at our procurement advisory committee here in the city that's looking at various things that affect purchasing and contracting in the city of Minneapolis. And so they're also working on how that guide will be shaped. So to say that it's taken a long time or that the work is not complete, I think is really sort of a mischaracterization of the iterative nature of the work.
Okay. Right. Well, seeing that there are no other questions, I'm going to wrap this up with a couple of comments, and then I'm going to call on. I'm sorry about that. Councilmember Kano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I didn't bring my laptop in here, so I don't know if you're in speaker management.
Or not.
So I have a question about the motion that Councilmember Gordon is going to present, and I wasn't sure where in the.
You can wait on that.
Okay,
Would
thank
that be
you.
okay? Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Well, I'm going to finish with some comments, and then I'm going to recognize Councilmember Gordon. Okay. I wasn't around when this resolution came to start this process, but from what I've seen so far, part of me just feels like it's taken a long time. 18 months, maybe in in government is a short time, but for myself, I feel like it's taken a long time. I see that on one of the documents it says that it is under construction or it's about to be completed. And, I think with regards to this whole racial equity toolkit, if we can call that or, call these a bunch of documents, there are a bunch of documents in which, I'm hoping that we can have what we would call a toolkit, one thing that can be given to the council to take a look at. And, maybe that's, 100 pages, maybe that's 5 pages, but, from what I've seen, I don't think we're where we need to be. And, I will start with this. Today I received an email from OAP with regards to the taxi versus UberX/Lyft debate. And, I think the person that sent the email sent it, really in good faith, and they wanted us to look at the issue from a racial equity standpoint, and they gave us about 20 questions to answer with regards to this issue. And, I think, being a council member is hard enough, and when you have 20 extra questions to ask on every little decisions that's going to be made, and every little means every big decision that gets made at the city. It's very difficult and makes our job that much more difficult. And, I think in some ways, I'm going to give a shout out to the mayor's office. I think the mayor has it right in the sense that, on her dry erase board, she has 3 questions that she asks every single time she makes a big decision. And those 3 questions, if I get them wrong, I'm imagining Mr. Hecker will correct me. But, the 3 questions are, 1, is it growing the city? 2, how does it move the dial on equity? And 3, does it work for the city, or does it make the city more efficient? And I think, those things are manageable. But, when I look at the racial equity assessment, just that alone is the first step. The second step is specific to the nature of the issue. And the first step, the racial equity assessment in itself, is 28 questions. And, so I think, we have to define what types of decision making requires this assessment in the first place. But outside of that, though, if we want for every decision that's made at the city to be 28 questions and counting in terms of how we approach it, it will be very difficult. It's cumbersome and burdensome to a lot of folks. And, those are my concerns. But the fundamental concern is this, though. The one thing that I started with is just, we talk about equity. All of us seem to use the word just like we drink water. But the problem I have is that we all come from different perspectives as to what equity means. And so we don't have a working definition of racial equity or equity. And, when I look at the definition of equity in this equity toolkit, I don't think the definition is a good definition of what it is. It's a very race neutral, but it's also a very colorblind type of definition. And I don't know if that definition gets us to where we need to go. And so I'm a big concern about what we have here as a toolkit. And I will say this to community members and everybody else here, is that if we don't come up with a good toolkit to move us forward, we may not ever use it, even if we adopt it. And so that's my concern. And so with that, I'm going to give the floor to President Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And you are dead on. I saw the same email this morning. And what I was thinking about is, okay, so you answer all those questions, you answer the 25 questions in your mind, I guess, or do you have to write a written report? Do you what's going to be required then? And absent among the questions is, does it lead to better service for the citizens that use the taxi cabs in the city of Minneapolis? So if the answers to the racial equity questions are negative, but it doesn't produce, the desired outcome, which I think should be better service, then that, again, that's held up as a real problem then. So I'm agree with you. I think if it's cumbersome, it won't be used. If it's cumbersome, it won't be used. And so I think we really have to think through this and come to a process that makes sense. This is really overreaching at this point, I think. Or I guess, it's in our hands. We can decide if it's overreaching or not. But this is one part of doing business as a city. We just had, if we're going to talk about equity, we just had a report in the paper this morning. People in North Minneapolis where, what was the percentage we just heard at our Safety Summit, I think we have something like 60% of all the violent crime occurs occurs in the city, occurs in North Minneapolis. And our citizens wait longer for police response to a 911 call. That's an equity matter. Now, maybe it's not racial equity, but it's equity of a sort. And so these definitions need to be clear with people. And racial equity is one part of equity, but there are other kinds of equity that are equally as important in this city. And so I think we're kind of at square one here, is what I'm saying.
Thank you, Council President. And, just one more thing, just to point out that, I hope folks don't read this criticism as me or any of my colleagues not supporting this work, because we absolutely want a great product, because if we can have a great product, we'll be able to use it across the city enterprise. But if we don't have a great product, it'll just be there and it'll collect us. So with that, I'm going to recognize Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you very much, and I think we can probably let Ms. Corbell sit down. Because I have a motion that I'd like to make. I also, there's a couple things I wouldn't mind responding to, but I'll try to be brief. I did want to acknowledge the Council President's concerns about the targets, and I actually don't think that, I think that we are together on the idea that our short-term goal should be that the city workforce should reflect the available pool of qualified candidates we have available to us. And that's what I think that first target, I know it's just gone now, but was all about. It's like the first step by 2020, let's see if we can try to get our workforce reflecting the available diversity in the qualified candidates out there. And I think that second goal, can we get our workforce to look more like the city, is kind of like our long-term 50-year, it's our long-term goal. If that's where we want to get, and we know to get there, we're going to have to dig down really deep and recruit and train and educate and have all these partners. But let's just admit that we'd like to try to get there, and we already discussed kind of some ways how. So I think that's important. And in terms of the length of the questionnaire, I think or the issues of the work that we're going to have, I think that's a really important question. And I think one of the keys that we're going to get buy-in from people who actually do this is if we take the time to go to them and say, how do you think this will work? How could we make this better? Would you use this? And actually get them to buy in. If they give enormous buy-in and add 50 questions, well, that's a whole different story. But they may give buy-in that will actually streamline it and make it better. So that kind of tees up my whole theory about this approach, which is to gratefully acknowledge we've made enormous progress, and there's been great work that's gone into this, and we're not going to stop the work and the effort going forward. But now the council's going to maybe pull this up a little bit so we can deal with it better in this new atmosphere. And things have really changed on the council and the work we're doing from today where it was back in 2012. So there's much more interest. And in the meantime, the council has moved forward this idea of an equity action plan. We had a mayor's race, and equity became one of the big issues of the campaign. And the candidate running on that issue won. And so, and we've got a diverse council. So I think it's time that we get a better handle on this. And I have emailed and I've passed out paper copies, and there's paper copies there, but I have a motion to make that has 4 main parts. I'd say 2 of them aren't that substantive. One is to just receive and file the report and presentation. Another one, well, the suggestion there from my special advisor is to move them separately. So would the chair prefer I preview them all first, or should we just go one at a time?
One at a time.
Okay. So anybody who wants to discuss these can pay careful attention to which one I'm moving, and then we can talk about those separately. The first one is simply I move to receive and file the report and the presentation.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
The second one, which has a little more of the substance, is the staff direction. And this has 3 parts. The first is to direct staff to conduct a study session for the City Council by the end of June. End of May would be fine, but end of June, that will include discussions of key policy decisions and a community stakeholder engagement plan related to the racial equity framework, as well as a timeline for completion of the Equitable Solutions Equity Assessment Toolkit. The second thing is report back on continued development of the framework to the Public Safety, Civil Rights, and Emergency Management Committee by July 15th, 2014, and to the Committee of the Whole by July 23rd, 2014. And the third staff direction is to analyze budget implications for implementation of the racial equity framework and ensure budget requests for 2015 are forwarded to the mayors and city council, I should say to the mayor, and the city council for inclusion in the 2015 budget process. And that's my second motion.
Could I get a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All right, hearing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
And gosh, I didn't even get to speak for it. I guess I'll just have to live with that, and hopefully it spoke for itself. It was I do want to express my appreciation to my colleagues. I actually work with Councilmember Glidden on this rather extensively, and Councilmember Yang and I had many discussions about this. And for the third motion, is a little bit more substance, and I also had the opportunity to discuss this with the mayor, and I do want to acknowledge that the mayor's chief of staff is here now, and mayor's policy aide Ben Hecker, and welcome Mr. Stiles and Mr. Hecker. If it's appropriate, I'm sure you'd be welcome to come up and speak if you want to, but you should pay careful attention to the wording of this next motion to make sure that it passes your muster, because your boss is involved. The third one is to create a racial equity policy work group convened and chaired by the mayor at her request to assist in ongoing oversight of the development of the racial equity framework, the racial equity action plan, and additional related initiatives, as well as to develop tools appropriate for use by the city council and mayor to view policy decisions through a racial equity lens. The work group will include Council Vice President Glidden, Councilmember Gordon, and Councilmember Yang, as well as the department heads identified in Resolution 2012-R456 and other staff from the Equitable Solutions staff team as appropriate, including the city clerk. A report from this group will be included with the presentations to the Public Safety, Civil Rights, and Emergency Management and Committee of the Whole committees as previously designated. And I'll make that motion, and I'd like to speak to it.
Could I get a second? Okay. Councilmember Gordon?
Well, I think this is a key important piece of this, and this is really now's the time that we should lift this up, and we should actually get the policymakers and leadership of the city involved and included in this, and I think this is really significant. I really appreciate the mayor's willingness to step forward and help lead this and convene this. I think that's how we're going to more effectively get culture change and actually make a difference in this if we take some ownership of it at the leadership level. And I don't think it's really fair to expect it to be housed in and worked in one department without more support from the leadership up here. And these are obviously issues that we have to grapple with. So I'm excited about this.
Does the mayor's office have comments?
Chair Yang, Council President Johnson, council members, thank you for the opportunity to speak to the staff direction. The Mayor Hodges asked me to convey her apologies for not being able to be here. She very much wishes she had been able to, and she is looking forward to chairing the work group that is proposed in the staff direction, is in favor of the staff direction the council member Gordon is moving. I wanted to thank Chair Yang, Vice Chair Gordon, and Vice President Glidden for being advocates for this work, and to thank Ms. Corbell and the Core Equity Solutions team, Ms. Francois, Mr. Brinda, Ms. Zhang, and Mr. Knuckles for their hard work. To address the point that Councilmember Yang made about the work actually getting done, I think that this will put us on a path to making sure that our departments and our external partners understand the work that we're doing as an enterprise, both internally and externally, to get to the work of eliminating racial disparities. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, Ken? Oh, Councilmember Cano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just had a quick question about what is the process for getting other council members to give feedback or to have the opportunity to participate in this process? I'm talking about specifically Part 3. I know that there may be some issues with quorum and that sort of thing, but I'd be really curious to find out just in general, how can, you know, the entire city council opt in if they want to opt in to participate and help in these efforts?
Councilmember Gordon?
Well, that's a good question. I think there's easily ways that we can have policy aids included at the table. We might have to look at that. In fact, Council Vice President and I were just discussing this very issue about an hour ago, or a little more now, I guess. And we need to look at the quorum issues. So I think there are potential. The way that it was written here, it said who it will include. It doesn't say who it excludes. So I think there is some room to work with that. And I will note that my intention with number 3 and 4, those aren't necessarily the staff direction pieces. So those are motions. I mean, the last one's a referral to a committee, doesn't have to go to the council. But this one, the intention is this should be moved to the council to make sure the full council is okay with that, which would mean as we move forward from committee, if this gets passed and is recommended to the full council, we can drill down on some of those other issues, and we may have to have the debate. As you know, if there is a quorum of any committee, the meetings have to be noticed and they become public, and so there might be some thought we want to give to that and what difference that might make.
And that might be a good thing.
And I'm open to having that done too. But let's have a chance to think about that and reflect on it, and maybe Mr. Chair, sorry, we're having a conversation.
No, that's okay. Meetings are for.
Okay, good. But let's bring that up at committee of the whole or at the council. And now that we've discussed it here, that tees it up really well for us to think about it and discuss it there as well.
Any other questions? Hearing none, the motion on the table, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. You have a fourth motion,
I do.
Councilmember Gordon.
And the fourth motion is relatively small, but I think it's very important because we sort of started learning a little bit more about our updated affirmative action plan today. And so I just want to make sure we refer that matter to committee of the whole so that they'll pick that up and they'll look at that at the appropriate time. So the motion is to refer to committee of the whole the matter of the updated affirmative action plan.
Any discussion? All right, seeing that there's none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. And Councilmember Gordon, I apologize for not taking your comments for your second motion. I just went a little bit too quick on this, but apologies, please. So seeing that there's no more business before this committee, the meeting is adjourned.